Hi, I'm William Stewart, co-founder of Teleios. Welcome back to our verse-by-verse study on the book of Matthew. We come into an exciting section. Well, it's all been exciting, but this is a new exciting section, the Olivet Discourse. So this is important because it discusses the end times. It's one of the three great discourses of Christ in the Gospels, the other being the Sermon on the Mount, as noted in Matthew 3 or 5 to 7 chapters, 5 to 7, also reflected in Luke, reflected in part in Luke 6. The upper room discourse in John 14 to 16, and then this discourse, Olivet Discourse at the Mount of Olives, here in Matthew 24 and 25, Luke 23, and Mark 13. So the more extensive discussions here are in Matthew. I think this reflects again the fact that Matthew is a gospel to the Jews, like Luke. And this is controversial. You'll have to make up your own mind. Luke, the purpose, as it says at the beginning, is to say what Jesus said. So he has a lot of the parables to the Jews and what Christ said. Matthew also clearly to the Jews places his gospel a little bit more in historical context with the Old Testament, I think, and especially times to come with Matthew 13 and the longer Olivet Discourse. And actually, I think even connecting the Old Testament to the New Testament in the Sermon on the Mount. So he has finished his, Christ has just finished his discourse. I shouldn't say discourse, his condemnation of the Pharisees at the end of Matthew 23. He now is alone with his disciples. Verse 1. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for him to show him the buildings of the temple. So he perhaps is on his way to the Mount of Olives, and they look back and see the temple. If you've been to Jerusalem, the Mount Moriah, in which it did sat, and the mosque that sits on it today is extremely apparent on the way to the Mount of Olives, just to the east of Jerusalem, and certainly on the mount itself. Christ said in verse 2, "See ye not these things? Verily I say to you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." So Christ is prophesying the destruction of the temple. And when will this be? You can ask. Again, this is open to interpretation. The most common interpretation is 70 AD, the first rebellion of the Jews against Rome, the general Vespasian, soon to be emperor, and his son Titus came and took back over Judea and ended their rebellion and destroyed the temple really completely. Other people point to the end times. There is a temple that is rebuilt, noted in the book of Revelation, that perhaps is destroyed in the last 2.5 years after the abomination of desolation. That is not specifically noted, and the destruction of the in AD 70 is not noted as well. Perhaps it's a telescoping prophecy, meaning it's completed more than one time. We don't know. What's the destruction of the temple mean? I think it goes along with God's prediction of his punishment to the Jews, of dispersing them and basically ending any land that is called their own. And this was really completed at the end of the third Jewish revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt, in 132 to 136, excuse me, AD, where the Jews were finally and completely kicked out of Judea and a dispersed people for almost 2,000 years. So then in verse 3, as he sat upon the Mount of Olives. Now, again, the Mount of Olives is east of Jerusalem. What's the significance of the Mount of Olives? It is mentioned in prophecy as being split at the return of Christ, creating a valley between the two parts. I think this is Christ's second coming. In context, it's also where David fled when he had to flee Jerusalem. Uh, he fled up to the Mount of Olives. This is back in 2 Samuel 15, when Absalom took over the kingship from him in revolt. It's important in Christ's ministry. Several prophecies were given from there and teachings. He started his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, Matthew 21, from the Mount of Olives. He returns there to pray, also at the Garden of Gethsemane, and he will ascend from there in Acts 1, saying from that point also the angel will say he will return at that point, which again is reflected in Zechariah 14. So, an important place in biblical history. The disciples then asked him, tell us, when shall these things be? Otherwise, when the temple is destroyed, and what shall be the sign of the coming, the end of the world? So they anticipate Christ will return. Christ responds and says, take heed no man deceive you. So this is the first point. The disciples and the people after him who believe are going to or will need to discern what's the actual coming of Christ. And they might be easily received. This is certainly reflected in 1 John 2 about the Antichrist and the Antichrist that have already come into the world. Many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ. And certainly the Antichrist and his beast in Revelation are trying to emulate Christ. But I think it also, there are other people who have historically, and I think will in the future, claim to be the Christ, just like they did before Christ's first coming. And so this will need to be discerned without deception by the disciples or future believers, and Christ is going to help them do that with the Olivet Discourse. Okay, so important information coming. We'll begin the discourse next time. Thank you for joining me today, and please return for the next video.